Hi, so today I've got quite an interesting video for you. I recently ran into a bit of an issue with a project I was making, which is all to do with sort of like how you facilitate file, specifically video streaming, um, on Amazon's AWS. It was all working fine locally, but when I moved to the cloud, I had a bit of problems, so I thought I'd essentially create this tutorial. So what we're going to be doing is using a Next.js app, and that's going to request a video from Amazon's S3 bucket, but it's going to do that not from the S3 bucket directly. It's going to do that from an interesting thing, which again I'd never used before, CloudFront, which is essentially Amazon's CDN, so you can create sort of a distribution. We'll go into details about what a CDN is if you're not familiar with it, and also how to set it all up ultimately. So yeah, let's get into it really. So we're going to need the Next.js app to begin with. So we'll start off with the standard create next app latest. I'm just going to do it within this directory here, as you can see. That is going to take just a wee second. Oh, that's a good point. It's going to ask us a few questions. So I'm just going to call this video streaming. And for now, I'm just going to click yes to everything. Don't know why it's duplicating that recently, it's a bit weird, but as I say, Next.js isn't the important part here. It's just ultimately we need a web framework to, well, we don't really need a web framework to display something, but it's the easiest way of getting this going. For sure. So that's installing the dependencies. And we should have a next app within a few seconds. Zero vulnerability, success, cool. So if we just have a look in that directory again, we have created a video streaming, so we're just going to navigate into that folder. We're just going to open this up in Visual Studio Code, but again, any editor, whatever your editor of choice is. So in the source app page, which is just the front page of the next app, we're just going to delete all, in fact not all this content. We're going to remove the inside. And I've copied and pasted a snippet of code, which is just the video element, because what we're going to do here is we're essentially just going to paste our URL once we've got that URL, and we'll be all good. So all I'm going to do is take that video bit, put it in there, so if you want to follow along, pause for now, and just add that wee snippet, which is video, just a standard width of 1500. We're going to add controls, it's just going to loop, it's going to autoplay. I had a bit of a problem with this earlier, I'm not too sure what happened, but anyway, we're going to add that. And just for this tutorial, I'm just going to mute it. You don't need that tag. And inside that, we'll just give it a standard source. Leave that blank for now, and then give it a type of video MP4. So that's all we need to do on the web app side of things, which is surprising. But it really does go to show how much the browser is actually doing quite a lot of the heavy lifting here. Ultimately, once it knows the source, it's going to handle all the buffering for you. It's going to deal with a whole bunch of stuff that you just don't need to deal with, which is quite good. And just to make sure everything's running, if we just give that an npm run dev, should open that up on port 3000. Yep, it has. If we go over here, we're going to be greeted by not a lot. It's just going to be an empty video, does nothing on a black screen. But that's good. We're at least making a wee bit of progress. So we are going to jump into AWS. If you don't have an AWS account, I'm not going to go through that right now, but what you need to do is essentially make an AWS account, obviously. Should be as simple as going to aws.amazon.com. You will need a credit card or a debit card. It's not going to charge you, and everything that we're going to use today is going to be completely free because of the usage. It's not going to hit a usage amount that would even bill you. So yeah, basically you get charged for what you use, but we're not going to use much. So again, don't worry about cost here. So once we've done that, you're going to end up in an AWS account. It's probably going to look a lot different to this. There'll be a whole bunch of other widgets. This is just what I've got set up because that's all I'm interested in, is how much I'm getting charged and my favorites. First thing to do is, if you're new and you don't already have a pre-selected region, next to your username there'll be a wee drop down. By default it'll say global if you haven't already selected a region that you're comfortable with. Highly recommend just choosing a region here, just so it automatically defaults to that region and then you'll know where your resources are. This can get quite confusing billing wise if you start creating resources in Ireland, Frankfurt, Central. So try stick everything in one account, and one way of doing that is essentially just setting your region and leaving it. So I've selected Europe London just because that's my closest region. Do that and you'll again end up in this dashboard, but instead of it saying global, it's now going to say the region that you've just selected, which is all good. So first of all, we're going to have to create our bucket. We're going to have to upload a file, and we're going to make sure that it is not visible to the, well, when I say not visible, there's no permissions to publicly view this file. So if you don't have it in the favorites already, you can search S3 at the top, jump into your S3 buckets. I've got a few here, don't worry about that, I'm going to blur them out just so we can get to them. And if we click create bucket, what we're going to have to do here is enter a bucket name. As mentioned before, if you haven't selected this region, this is going to look slightly different and it's going to ask you for a region here, and that's why I was saying it's always best to sort of pre-select this. But anyway, when it comes to AWS S3 buckets, AWS doesn't really protect you from malicious abuse. When it comes to if someone finds the name of a bucket, I've seen it on YouTube, and you should give that sort of stuff a watch at the minute because it's quite prevalent. If someone finds your bucket name, they can actually hammer the cost of this. So what I typically do when creating buckets is just jump over to a thing called GUID generator, generate a GUID, give that a copy, just because it's completely random, scrambled. Well, it's not completely random, but pseudo-random. Paste that in there, and then just give it a readable name after that. So in my case, we're just doing video streaming, so video. And again, just from a security point of view, no one's guessing that name. If it was just video streaming, that's a highly, there's potential that you could, someone could find it, and again, it's problematic on that front. So once you've done that, we're going to scroll down. When it comes to object ownership, we want to leave ACLs disabled. We want to scroll down, and under the public access settings, we want to make sure that that is checked. It's checked by default, don't uncheck it. We want to make sure that the bucket stays private, but the CDN serves the files from the bucket. I'll show you what I mean by that later. So leave that ticked. The bucket versioning, we're just going to leave as disabled, tags empty, and we're going to leave this all as default as well, just leave the encryption up to Amazon. So if we create this bucket now, you're going to get taken back to the dashboard, and you're just going to select the one that's just been created. It's going to have nothing in it, but we are going to upload a file, which might take me a second to find again. This was not easy when I first looked into this. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to drag my MP4 file, and again, try to keep this small just for the tutorial, but again, this really doesn't matter. This could be any size. And you can see here that we've got 1.mp4, it's 145 meg. It's being dropped into this bucket, which is the one we've just created. If we click upload, this will take a few seconds just because of the size. Cool, so we now have our bucket, we now have our file in the bucket, and if we click on that file that's just been created there, you're going to get taken to this screen and you're going to see an object URL. If you copy that and try access that within the browser, you're going to see that Amazon essentially says no access, access denied. And the reason for that is the fact that we left those checkboxes for public access disabled. That's all good though, that's what you want to see. If you don't see this message and you do see a video pop up here, you're going to have to change your settings again to make sure that you do disable all public access. Anyway, seeing as that's all configured fine, we're going to jump back And I think this is time to sort of discuss what CloudFront is, what CDN is, and sort of why it's used instead of sort of targeting just a S3 bucket directly. So when you're dealing with this without a CDN, essentially you could see this origin server here. Just imagine that is the S3 bucket. There's two sort of important things here. One is on the performance side of things, and one is on the sort of protection side of things. So from a pure performance side, if you see this person up in Alaska and the origin server's in Australia, pure latency wise on serving that file is ultimately going to take the person in Alaska longer to be served that file than the person in Africa or Asia. From a security point of view, it would be very easy to target this one server, i.e. the bucket, and potentially prevent other users from being able to be served content just because you're hammering the service, just overloading it and overwhelming it. So what a CDN sort of provides is the ability to use your S3 as the source and cache the source to a whole bunch of edge locations. And what I mean by edge locations, if I jump to this next tab, you'll see here, consider this our S3 bucket, which let's just say is in Europe at the minute, and all of these other sort of orangey things are our edge nodes. These are essentially just cache servers that are located all over the world. You could set this up differently, which will show you what I mean by that. At the minute we're only going to set up a North America and Europe, but ultimately you could set up one that has a whole plethora of different regions. And what this means essentially, instead of, let's say, this user up in Alaska previously having to call down to Australia, they would only have to send a request to their local cache node to be served that file, so therefore the latency is a lot better from a performance standpoint, instead of them all having to contact Europe and then getting the file back. On top of that, from like a DDoS point of view, to try and take on an edge network like this is virtually impossible, to be honest. You would need a lot of service requests to be able to take on sort of like a CDN properly. So yeah, just from that point of view as well, it's also handy. But anyway, enough talking, enough yapping. Hopefully that's explained it. We're going to set this up now over on Amazon, and we're going to have that essentially use this bucket. Yeah, so if we jump back to the dashboard, as you can see, I've got it over in the favorites, but again, if you don't have it initially, just type in CloudFront, give it a star just so it's always on your dashboard. If you jump in here, you'll see I have a distribution, but anyway, we'll create another one just at the top right. And what it's going to ask for here is quite a few options, but what we're going to do is select the bucket that we've just created, which I believe, I shouldn't have called these the same things, I think it's this one. Let me just double check that before we go down a rabbit hole. Yep, 404. 404A, cool. Yeah, no video streaming. So select the bucket that you just created that you want to allow access to and serve files, and under origin access we're going to select origin access control, and we're going to have to create a new OAC. So the name of this OAC has to be under 64 characters, I believe. So I'm just going to take some of that gumph off that's all in there and just leave it as video streaming. I think I've already got one that's video streaming, so I'm just going to say 2. We're going to leave the signing behavior as sign requests. We're going to create that. And you're going to see here that it's going to warn you that you essentially need to update your S3 bucket policy. We're going to go into what that is in a minute. You don't need to worry about that, but if you keep scrolling, we're going to deal with that once we've essentially created this distribution. So under the default cache behavior, we're going to change a few settings. If you have a look at the viewer protocol policy, the redirect HTTP to HTTPS, we want to select that just to make sure that all connections are secure. We're going to keep scrolling. We're going to see an option to change our caching policy. I'd recommend just leaving that as caching optimized. There is a whole bunch of different options that you could essentially go in there and have a look at. What they do, how they work, and as I say, select what you want, but ultimately I'm just going to leave this as default. We're going to keep scrolling down a bit more. Don't need to worry about any of that. And under Web Application Firewall, we do need to select something here. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to say don't enable the security precautions, because I'm not that interested. If this is a production sort of deployment, you really should enable the security precautions and then basically go down all that front. I'd say because this is a simple tutorial, I'm just not going to go down that front. We're not going to discuss that in this tutorial. And again, similarly for the settings, the last thing we need to do is essentially tell it how many nodes we want, like the edge nodes. So we can use North America and Europe for this, just because it's a simple deployment. Again, nothing production based or anything like that. If you are deploying this to a production sort of environment, I would, depending on the amount of users you have, drastically influences this sort of decision. If you've got a project that doesn't have a lot of users, I'd probably just stick to this setting here, because ultimately that captures, like, realistically a lot of the user base. Realistically, if it doesn't, there is different options here: the North America, Europe, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And if you've got a high volume of users, ultimately I'd select all edge locations just for best performance. But again, because this is a tutorial, we're just going to select use North America and Europe. We're going to scroll down a wee bit. I'm pretty sure that's all we need to set up. Yep, that looks like it. So we're going to click on the create distribution. That's then going to give us the same warning that we've seen before, which is we need to update the bucket policy to essentially complete this. So we're just going to click on this wee button over here, copy policy. And if you click on this go to S3 bucket permission link, something really weird happened here last time. Yeah, it's done the same again. But if you just leave it for a second, it somehow gets to it. It's bizarre. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but ew. Yeah, so once you're inside your bucket, and if you haven't been redirected to the right place, just go back to S3 and then find the bucket that you've just set this up for, and go to the permissions tab. Scroll down a bit and you'll see a bucket policy section. So we're going to click edit here, and we're going to paste in what we just copied from the CloudFront warning. So you can see here we've got a JSON snippet. It's just a simple control policy, and it's essentially telling S3 what can interface with it and what permissions they have on it. So you can see here the principal is the CloudFront service. The action that CloudFront will be allowed to essentially perform in this bucket is just the S3 get object, which will be able to get files. You want to make sure that's restricted to that, because obviously you've got stuff like save permissions, put permissions. We just want to be able to get, so that's all good. The resource, so this allows us to sort of restrict things a wee bit and tell it what it can and can't see. By default, this is set up to essentially, here's the bucket name, and then everything within that bucket, all of its files and folders, recursively down, essentially CloudFront will be able to see and also get. If you want to be a bit more restrictive, you can do. So if we, let's say, had a folder within this called videos, and there was other sort of content you didn't want CloudFront to see, we can essentially create this here, which would allow videos as a subfolder, and then ultimately everything within that down. But because we're just doing a very simple thing, just leave that as default, pretty much. And all we're doing here, last bit, is just saying the condition that it has to be essentially that very specific CloudFront distribution, which is the one we just created here. So yeah, once we've done that, that's pretty much it. So we're going to save the changes. We'll save successfully. We're going to go back to objects. We're going to go in here and just make a note of whatever your key was. Typically it's just the file name, but this is essentially what we're going to need to access this file. So what we need to do is back over in our CloudFront distribution. If we just give this a refresh, that warning should disappear, which it has. You're going to see the distribution domain name. So we're going to copy this, and we're going to head back over to our React app. I'm just going to paste that within the source part that you created, and then followed by a slash, and then whatever your file name was. So in my case, the key, which we just talked about, which I made a note of, was CloudFront /1.mp4. Give that a save. You'll see it's compiled. Let's jump to the browser, and you're going to see the content has been served by Amazon through in my case, the European edge node that I've just created within that CloudFront distribution. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And what's nice about this as well, you'll see that all the buffering, as I mentioned before, is handled by the browser. So you'll see that the content's essentially running, and then it's cached, not cached, it's essentially went away and fetched another bit of data. And yeah, it deals with a whole bunch of the heavy lifting for you, which is quite nice. So, I think that's pretty much it. There's not much more to talk about. Hopefully that's helped someone create a decent product. As I say, just had this issue initially. I thought, why not share with the world how I fixed this for myself. Yeah, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be trying to post a bit more on this channel. And if, let's say, you have a problem that you potentially are having a problem with and you want me to have a look into tutorial-wise, leave a comment. That's the best way to get that done. If it's an interesting topic and I can find a solution, I will create a solution for you. But yeah, until next time, have a good one.